Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. Classic Books Explained. Ernest Hemingway once imagined ending the life of his own protagonist, tying a 50-pound weight to his feet and throwing him in the Seine River. He was hallucinating, going blind, and the sun also rises was driving him to the edge of self-destruction. The book that made him a legend nearly destroyed him first. The world had barely recovered from the Great War, a conflict so mechanized and brutal it shattered every romantic notion of heroism humanity had clung to for centuries. Millions of young men returned home with bodies mutilated by shrapnel and minds scarred by trench warfare. But there was another wound, deeper and less visible. A spiritual emptiness. A sense that all the old certainties about God, country, and honor had been exposed as lies. These were the lost generation, and they gathered in the cafés and nightclubs of Paris, drinking to forget what they could never quite articulate. Hemingway knew this, wound intimately. In 1918, he'd volunteered as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross in Italy, desperate for adventure at just 18 years old. On a moonless night near the Piave River, an Austrian mortar shell exploded near his position, taking the life of the man beside him and embedding more than 200 pieces of shrapnel in Hemingway's legs. He was awarded the Italian Silver Medal of Bravery for carrying a wounded Italian soldier to safety, despite his own injuries, but the real wound went deeper than the metal fragments surgeons couldn't remove. He'd seen the randomness of losing one's life, the way a shell landed here instead of there, ending this man, but sparing that one. There was no meaning in it, no divine plan, just chaos and meat. When he returned to Paris in the early 1920s, the city had become a haven for Americans fleeing prohibition and provincial attitudes. F. Scott Fitzgerald was there, writing about the wealthy and damned. Gertrude Stein held court in her salon, surrounded by Picasso paintings and acolytes. Ezra Pound argued about poetry in dim-lit rooms, and Hemingway, newly married and desperately poor, worked as a foreign correspondent while teaching himself to write fiction in a new way. Stripped of Victorian ornament, clean as a knife blade, with everything important hidden beneath the surface. The story he needed to tell came from his own life. In the summer of 1925, he traveled to the festival of San Fermín in Pamplona, Spain, with a group that included Lady Duff Twisden, a beautiful, alcoholic British aristocrat, and Harold Loeb, a Princeton-educated writer who was sleeping with her. Hemingway was infatuated with Duff himself, and the trip became a disaster of drunken jealousy, intimate tension, and barely suppressed violence. Within months, he'd transformed it all into fiction. The Sun Also Rises was published in October 1926 by Scribners, and it immediately divided critics. Some recognized a revolutionary new prose style, direct, unsentimental, almost journalistic in its clarity. Others were appalled by its moral emptiness, its casual acceptance of promiscuity and alcoholism, its refusal to condemn or console. But young readers, especially those who'd survived the war, recognized themselves in its pages. Hemingway had found words for what they'd felt but couldn't express, the sense of moving through life wounded, searching for meaning in a world that offered none. His writing style, which he called the iceberg theory, worked by radical omission. If you know enough about what you're writing, he believed, you can leave out everything obvious and trust the reader to feel the weight of what's submerged. In The Sun Also Rises, the protagonist's war wound is never explicitly described. The extent of Lady Brett Ashley's promiscuity is implied through glances and silences. Emotions are conveyed not through introspection, but through what characters do and fail to do. This wasn't just a technique. It mirrored the emotional numbness of his characters, people so damaged they could only communicate through understatement and alcohol. The wound is never described because some injuries can't be spoken directly. They can only be circled around, approached obliquely, felt in the silence between words. If you're finding this exploration of Hemingway's masterpiece compelling, please subscribe to stay connected with our series on the greatest books ever written. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these literary journeys to life. The novel's protagonist is Jake Barnes, an American journalist living in Paris. Like Hemingway, Jake had been wounded in the war, but his injury is more devastating, a war wound that robbed him of his ability to be intimate. This was an astonishing subject for 1920s literature, when such matters were simply not discussed in polite society. Hemingway never describes the wound explicitly. We learn about it through indirection, through Jake lying sleepless in bed, through his bitter thoughts about what he's lost. The physical injury becomes a symbol for the emotional and spiritual emasculation of an entire generation, men who return from war unable to participate fully in life, who could observe and desire but never quite connect. He can scroll through others' lives while unable to live his own. Jake's wound makes him the perfect narrator. He watches everyone else make fools of themselves over love and lust, while remaining trapped in his own body, unable to act on his desires. He's a journalist, professionally trained to observe and record. This gives him a bitter clarity about the emptiness of the expatriate life, even as he remains embedded in it. He drinks with his friends, attends the parties, makes the rounds of cafés and nightclubs, but he sees through the performance. He knows they're all play-acting and having a good time, using noise and alcohol to drown out the silence beneath. Jake doesn't complain about his wound. He doesn't rage against the universe's cruelty. When the pain becomes unbearable, he slips into a cathedral and tries to pray. Even though he's not sure God exists, he just keeps going, finding dignity in small rituals, work, friendship, the shape of days. This is the only heroism left when all the grand heroic gestures have been exposed as lies. He simply endures, finding what dignity he can, because what else is there to do? When the pain becomes unbearable, he slips into a cathedral and tries to pray, though he's not sure he believes anymore. He's searching for meaning in a world that seems determined to offer none. If this sounds familiar, the sense that everything you were told would give life meaning has turned out to be empty, that connection feels impossible despite being more connected than ever, that you're going through the motions while numbing yourself with whatever's available. You're experiencing what Hemingway captured a century ago. The lost generation wasn't the last lost generation. Every generation since has felt this way, including yours. You know Jake Barnes. You've been Jake Barnes. You've woken up knowing something essential is broken. You're playing a role in your own life, that everyone around you is doing the same performance, and you're all pretending not to notice. The person Jake loves, the woman who makes his wound unbearable, is Lady Brett Ashley. But if Jake is broken and trapped, Brett is something more dangerous. She's free, magnetic, and absolutely destructive. She enters the novel like a force of nature, arriving at a Paris dance club surrounded by a crowd of gay men, her hair cut short like a boy's, wearing a man's felt hat, already drunk at the start of the evening. Everything about her challenges 1920s conventions. She dresses androgynously, drinks like a man, speaks with brutal frankness about intimacy, and moves through a series of affairs with no apparent guilt or consequences. She's the new woman, liberated from Victorian constraints, and she's absolutely magnetic. Brett was based on Lady Duff Twisden, the aristocratic beauty who tormented Hemingway in Pamplona. In the novel, she becomes something more complex than a simple femme fatale. She genuinely loves Jake, and he loves her, but his wound makes a physical relationship impossible. This creates the novel's central torture: two people who belong together but can never fully be together, circling each other in an endless dance of desire and frustration. Brett comes to Jake when she needs emotional support, treats him as her confessor and closest friend, then goes off to sleep with other men. It's a cruelty she doesn't fully intend, but can't seem to stop inflicting. She's engaged to Mike Campbell, a Scottish war veteran who drinks to obliterate himself. Their relationship is mutually destructive. He knows she's unfaithful, mocks her for it publicly, but lacks the strength or will to leave her. They wound each other with elaborate courtesy, using humor to deliver vicious truths. Mike calls her a lovely piece, talks about her infidelities as if they're amusing anecdotes, all while slowly drinking himself toward oblivion. It's a relationship built on resignation. Neither expects anything better from life or each other. Brett also has a brief affair with Robert Cohn, a Princeton-educated writer who represents everything Hemingway despised: romantic idealism, emotional neediness, an inability to accept that life owes you nothing. Cohn thinks their affair means something, that Brett might actually love him. His delusion makes him pathetic in the eyes of the other characters, who understand that nothing means anything, that affection is temporary and connection is impossible. The novel's treatment of Cohn is complicated by the casual anti-Semitism of Jake and his friends, who see Cohn's Jewish heritage as related to his weakness and sentimentality. It's an ugly aspect of the book, reflecting the prejudices of its time and characters without endorsing or condemning them. But Brett's most significant affair is with Pedro Romero, a 19-year-old bullfighter they met in Pamplona. Romero represents everything the expatriates have lost: youth, purity, skill, grace under pressure, a life lived with purpose and meaning. He faces the end in the bullring with the calm precision of an artist, performing a ritual as old as civilization. Brett becomes obsessed with him, and in one of the novel's most morally complex moments, Jake introduces them, essentially facilitating the affair with the woman he loves, betraying his own values because he can't bear to deny her anything. Brett sleeps with Romero and nearly destroys him. She wants to devour his innocence, make him like the rest of them, wounded, cynical, lost. Swipe right, hook up, ghost, repeat. Chasing intensity because nothing else penetrates the numbness. But in the novel's only genuinely selfless act, she leaves him. She recognizes that she's poisoned, that she corrupts everything she touches, and she lets him go before she can ruin him completely. It's a moment of self-awareness that redeems her slightly, suggesting that beneath the hard-drinking, promiscuous exterior is someone who knows exactly what she's become and hates herself for it. To understand why these damaged people matter, you have to see them at the festival of San Fermín, where everything explodes. The novel reaches its emotional climax during the festival of San Fermín in Pamplona. After the sterile aimlessness of Paris, the endless cafe conversations, the drunken parties that blur into one another, the sense of days passing without meaning, Pamplona offers something raw and authentic. The festival is an explosion of color, sound, and violence. Bulls run through narrow cobblestone streets while men test their courage by running ahead of the horns. Religious processions wind through town squares. Wine flows freely, and strangers dance together in the streets until dawn. It's pagan and Catholic at once, ancient and immediate, a celebration of life in all its beautiful brutality. For Hemingway, bullfighting was the ultimate art form, a performance where the artist risks his life to create beauty, where technical skill and courage combine in a ritual confrontation with the end. He studied it with the intensity of a scholar, learning the technical vocabulary, the history, the subtle distinctions between great toreros and merely competent ones. In The Sun Also Rises, the bullfighting scenes are described with precise, almost loving detail. We see exactly how Romero works the bull, how he stands impossibly close to the horns, how his movements are economical and pure. The beauty and brutality are inseparable. Jake understands bullfighting in his bones, the way you understand something you genuinely love, rather than something you're just watching, to seem cultured. He can distinguish great artistry from flashy showmanship. Robert Cohn, by contrast, is merely a spectator, repulsed by the blood and unable to see past the violence to the skill and grace beneath. This distinction matters enormously to Hemingway. There are people who understand life's essential nature, that it's tragic, violent, and brief, but can be faced with dignity. And there are people who want life to be something prettier than it is. Jake has faced reality. Cohn still believes in romance. Before Pamplona, Jake and his friend Bill Gorton take a fishing trip to the Spanish countryside. It's the novel's only respite from the anxiety and tension that permeate the rest of the book. The two men fish in cold mountain streams, drink wine, joke with each other, and enjoy the simple pleasure of male friendship without romantic rivalry or emotional complication. The natural world offers a brief sense of peace, but they know it can't last. They'll return to Paris, to Brett, to the whole exhausting dance of desire and disappointment. When the group gathers in Pamplona, Jake, Brett, Mike, Cohn, Bill, and eventually Romero, the fiesta becomes a pressure cooker for all their tensions. Everyone is drinking constantly, barely sleeping, moving from bullfights to cafés to dance halls in an increasingly frantic attempt to maintain the illusion of having a good time. Cohn watches Brett obsess over Romero and finally snaps. He fights Mike, knocking him down. He fights Jake, giving him a black eye. Then he confronts Romero and beats him savagely, but the young bullfighter refuses to stay down. Despite a battered face, Romero insists on fighting his bulls the next day, performing brilliantly despite his injuries. His courage makes Cohn's romantic jealousy look even more pathetic. By the end of the fiesta, the group had disintegrated. Cohn has left in shame. Brett has abandoned Romero. Mike is too drunk to function. They scatter back to their separate lives, the brief intensity of Pamplona already fading into memory. The party is over, and they're left with their hangovers and their wounds, and the knowledge that tomorrow they'll do it all again, searching for meaning in rituals and sensations because there's nothing else to search for. Take a moment to share this video with someone who loves great literature, or leave a comment below about your own experience with Hemingway's work. These conversations enrich our collective understanding of these timeless stories. But the real revolution wasn't in the story. It was in how Hemingway told it, using a technique so radical it changed American literature forever. The novel's revolutionary power lies not in its plot, which is deliberately small-scale and domestic, but in Hemingway's prose style. He stripped away everything Victorian literature had taught writers to do. No elaborate metaphors, no purple descriptions of sunsets and emotions, no authorial intrusion to explain what characters are thinking or feeling, just clean, declarative sentences that state facts and let readers infer everything else. It was prose that worked like poetry, where every word mattered, and what was left out mattered more than what was included. Consider how he describes simple actions. It was a good cafe. The wine was cold. Brett was gone. These sentences seem almost childishly simple, but their simplicity is deceptive. By refusing to elaborate, refusing to tell us how to feel, Hemingway forces us to experience the emptiness his characters feel. The repetition of simple sentence structures creates a hypnotic rhythm, like waves against a shore, wearing away our defenses until we're as numb as Jake and his friends. At one point in the novel, Jake lies in bed thinking, "I went to sleep. When I woke, it was the sound of the bombing in my head. I could not wake up. I could not go to sleep." That's it, that's the whole passage. No explanation, no commentary, just the permanent echo of war that follows him into every moment. The dialogue in The Sun Also Rises reveals character through rhythm and evasion rather than direct statement. People say one thing and mean another. They joke to avoid being serious. They drink to avoid feeling. Replace wine with Netflix, cannabis, social media, adult content, video games. The substance changes, but the impulse remains identical. When emotions become too intense, they change the subject or order another round. This is how traumatized people actually talk, circling around what matters, approaching it obliquely, never quite landing on the truth, because the truth is unbearable. Initial critical reaction was mixed. Some reviewers praised Hemingway's innovation and honesty. Others found the novel morally bankrupt, complained about its aimless characters and excessive drinking, objected to its frank treatment of physical intimacy and masculine inadequacy. The Chicago Tribune called it, doubtless, the most dismaying book of the season. But young readers, especially veterans, recognized themselves immediately. Hemingway had captured something essential about post-war consciousness, the sense of moving through life wounded, seeking intensity to feel alive, finding that nothing quite penetrates the numbness. The influence of Hemingway's style on American prose cannot be overstated. He created a template that writers are still working with or against a century later. Raymond Carver's minimalist short stories are direct descendants. Joan Didion's cool, precise observations owe a debt to Hemingway's technique. Cormac McCarthy's spare, violent prose follows the same principles of omission and understatement. Even writers who reject Hemingway's masculinity and worldview often adopt elements of his style. The short sentences, the concrete details, the emotional restraint. The Sun Also Rises also had an enormous cultural impact beyond literature. It popularized the image of Americans in Paris, living cheaply and drinking heavily while pursuing art and experience. It introduced American readers to bullfighting, sparking a fascination that drew thousands of tourists to Spain. Most significantly, it gave a name and identity to the lost generation. Young people who felt disconnected from traditional values and purposes, who saw through society's lies but couldn't quite figure out what to believe instead. The novel's title comes from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. It's a vision of eternal cycles, generations of human suffering repeating endlessly, while the indifferent universe continues on. The sun rises, sets, rises again. We suffer, pass away, and are replaced by others who suffer and pass away. There's a cold comfort in this perspective. Yes, your pain is meaningless in cosmic terms, but so is everyone else's. We're all brief flickers of consciousness in an indifferent universe, so we might as well maintain our dignity while we're here. Every generation discovers its own version of feeling lost, disconnected from inherited values, uncertain about the future, seeking meaning in a world that seems increasingly chaotic and hostile. The specific historical circumstances change, but the underlying condition, the search for purpose when all the old certainties have collapsed, remains constant. The sun also rises speaks to that permanent human condition. Hemingway would go on to write other celebrated novels, A Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls, The Old Man and the Sea. He would become a celebrity, crafting a public persona of hypermasculine adventure, big game hunter, deep-sea fisherman, war correspondent, champion of bullfighters and boxers. But in some ways, The Sun Also Rises remained his purest achievement, the novel where he invented his style and captured a specific historical moment with perfect clarity. Everything after was elaboration or repetition. The novel refuses consolation or redemption. Unlike traditional narratives where characters learn and grow, Jake ends exactly where he began, in love with Brett, unable to have her, going through the motions of living while knowing it's essentially pointless. The final scene captures this perfectly. Brett has left Romero and called Jake to rescue her in Madrid. They sit in a taxi together, and she says wistfully, "Oh, Jake, we could have had such a damned good time together." He replies, "Yes, isn't it pretty to think so?" That exchange contains everything: the permanent longing, the ironic self-awareness, the refusal to indulge in comforting fantasies. Jake knows they wouldn't have had a good time together. Their relationship would have been as damaged and destructive as everything else in their lives. But it's pretty to think otherwise. Pretty to imagine a world where love conquers all and wounds heal and people live happily ever after. The Sun Also Rises won't give us that pretty fantasy. It offers only the truth, as Hemingway saw it. Life is suffering, connection is impossible, meaning is an illusion we create to make the emptiness bearable. But we go on anyway, maintaining whatever grace we can manage, because what else is there to do? The sun also rises, and we rise with it. You're wounded, you're lost, you're searching for something you suspect doesn't exist, and you'll keep searching anyway, because that's what it means to be human. Hemingway understood this a century ago. The wound changes. His was shrapnel and loss of intimacy. Yours might be something else entirely, but the condition remains. We're all Jake Barnes, lying awake at night, knowing something essential is broken, getting up the next morning and doing it again anyway. If this resonated with you, subscribe. We explore the books that tell uncomfortable truths about being alive. Drop a comment about your own experience with feeling lost. I read everyone, and share this with someone who needs to know they're not the only one stumbling through the performance of life. Until next time, maintain your grace. There's nothing else.